Welcome to the Real Freedom Podcast, where we inspire you to pursue your passion to gain time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. Let's get some real freedom together. All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Real Freedom Podcast, where we talk about building time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. And today we have a special guest that's going to talk about a few things that we haven't talked on the episodes. VA loans, how to leverage VA loans to help build your wealth, and also just talking about trading and angel investing. So we're so excited to have Erik Smolinski on here, and Erik is going to talk about how he built wealth through real estate, through investing. He does angel investing, like I mentioned. So a little bit more about him. People tend to think about, when they think about people building wealth in real estate, is they came from money, right? And so Erik's stories came from a single parent, low income household, worked odd jobs as a kid, and you began investing in high school. And so while you weren't going to attend college, you were able to get a scholarship. And then ultimately you went into the Marine Corps, and you completed 6 years of active duty before you transitioned to the reserves. Also got an MBA. Through trading, through real estate and all that, you became a millionaire by the age of 30. So congratulations on that. And you're a smart dude. You know, I think that's for a lot of people to know, hey, just an average guy coming from an average upbringing can apply these principles and build wealth. So Erik, we're so excited to have you on the show and share your wisdom with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Mike. And it's funny that you bring up the point about the average person can do this. And, you know, it's so colloquial. We hear it all the time, but I know that different people connect with different average people. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge part of the way that I started getting interested in investing. I didn't even know what it was until one of my teachers in high school saw me hustling, saving money. And they were like, hey, have you thought about investing? So it was just one person that I knew that made a recommendation that turned on a light bulb and completely sent me down an entire different life trajectory. So I think the beauty of what you do is you offer different kinds of people for others to connect with and pick up what they can. So thank you for having me. I'm stoked.
And I think it's key because I think, number one, mindset is so important to how you approach life, how you build wealth, how you pursue things like, you know, going into the armed forces. Mindset is so important. And I think there's certainly people that have challenges. They have more things that they have to overcome in life. And then there's also people that too also realize that I can make what I want out of my life based on how I attack things, how I overcome obstacles. And so you're an example of somebody that has done that. You weren't spoon-fed anything, and yet at the same time you were able to roll up your sleeves and dig in. This is hopefully inspirational for people that sometimes might have the mindset of, oh, you know, I needed to be born into wealth, or I needed to have things handed to me to be successful. And you're somebody that shows, hey, I can be successful and I can overcome challenges that come my way. So maybe share a little bit about your upbringing, a little bit about kind of your background and how you got into investing. Walk us from the beginning here, how you kind of transition through things in life.
Yeah, easy. So I think for me early on, you know, like you did in the intro, which was beautifully done. I did come from a single mom, and she worked 2 jobs plus, and she was a contractor. So she didn't have like a 401k. She didn't have a bunch of excess savings. A lot of what we did, unfortunately, was fueled by debt. And I just remember seeing the way that we were living life. And I was like, there's gotta be a better way. Like there has to be a better way. I didn't know what it was, but I thought there had to be a better way because, you know, if the car broke, that was a problem, or I might not be able to go get dropped off at my friend's house because that's going to take the gas we needed to get to work the next day. Or if, you know, if I missed the school bus, that was always a huge problem. I missed it once, and that was a big deal. Yeah. So I just started realizing like, man, you know, in this financially constrained environment, there's a lot of impacts. And the way I started thinking about it is, how can I change our paradigm, not really having much to start with? So I immediately started working. There's actually a guy I used to hunt on his property, and he had like a shale pit, and he like processed wood. This is, you know, where I'm from in New York. And, you know, I was just like, can I work for you? And he's like, yeah, what do you want to do? I was just like, well, you split wood all the time. What if I do that or load shale? He's like, well, you're like 12, so you're not going to load shale, but you could split wood, which I guess the calculus there sounds off, but it was super normal, for us to split wood. So that's what I started doing. And I actually loved that job. It was a great job until you hit the log that had bees in it. That happened a handful of times. And man, that is terrifying, because then you get like bee PTSD and you hit a log and you think you hear buzzing that's not there.
Yeah.
So, so I started just doing these odd jobs anywhere I could find work. And I started working at a local bowling alley. I was trying to scrape together anything I could. And then for any younger people that might be listening to this, one of the best jobs I had as a younger person was selling Christmas trees at like a local farm.
Yeah.
And the tips were so good. Part of me, I'm 31 now. Part of me thinks about going back and selling Christmas trees because the money's really good.
Yeah.
But I started, socking away what I could. And then, like I told you, that one high school teacher of mine, he's a huge life mentor for me. He's the one that got me to apply for a scholarship for my undergrad, but he's the one that introduced me to investing. And I realized the power of investing early on. And he's the one actually that got me into real estate, because he was a retired Air Force colonel. And he moved all over the place, and just about everywhere he went, kind of like what I started doing, just bought a house. And then when he left, he rented it and bought another house, and so on and so forth. So he's the one that planted that whole approach in my head that, we can save, which is good. But the problem is on a regular salary, even if it's a high paying salary, you're making $300,000-$400,000 a year. If you're just trying to build wealth by saving, it requires the passage of additional time. And, it depends on, what your goals are. But for me, my main objective was to have wealth a little earlier in my life. So then I could have choices. Like I will always work on something because I really like to work. I think it's important. I think it's important for us to add value to our communities. I really do think that. But there's a whole other flavor to it when it's a choice. And I think that by his example, he's the one that got my mind working in this completely alternate way. And I think that that's, hopefully one of the messages we can discuss on the video today for people, and get some other people thinking that way.
It's important, for young people to be exposed to different paths, because I didn't necessarily know what else was possible. I followed the example of my parents, which was work a job, get a stable income. And so I didn't necessarily see how entrepreneurship could work. I went to college actually for entrepreneurship 20 years ago, before it was cool. But at the same time, I didn't know how to take a risk. And so I didn't do anything with that entrepreneurship degree right out of college, because I didn't know how to take a risk. I didn't see the value. I didn't see the upside of taking a risk. I saw the bad side of those risks, and not necessarily the upside of the potential that's out there. So in high school, then you started to tinker with it, with investing. What did that look like for you?
So I opened up a custodial account because I was too young to open up my own brokerage account. And the way that I started, and it's funny because the guy that got me into investing, he didn't really invest himself. He had like some accounts, but he didn't like actively trade or anything. He's like, this is just something you should look at. So I started reading what I could, and I got struck by dumb luck. And I bought a handful of companies that were very young that ended up doing very well. There's a company called Apple, Amazon, Netflix, literally all three of those.
I've heard of all three of those. Interesting.
Funny enough. And I just started seeing success early. And I think for investing, that's okay. I think for traders, that's a bad thing. And that's just a whole other psychological conversation. But I think once I started seeing like, hey, I didn't start with much money, and this is growing like pretty dang fast here. There's something to this. And I have a naturally obsessive personality. When there's something I'm interested in, it really does consume me. I have to be careful. Like when I used to play video games, I would just get so locked in. So I had to be really thoughtful, but luckily it bit me with investing. And that's how I stumbled into trading. Is I was thinking, okay, if I invested this and I was able to start getting these returns in X amount of time, if I trade, then it should happen faster. And like most young men, my patience isn't good now, but it is even worse then.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to figure out how to snowball this thing even faster. And that's really what got me started. Taking it very seriously was that early success. So I was super fortunate about that.
Talk about the decision to go into the armed forces.
Yeah.
And how are you able to keep these things afloat as well when you spent your time in the Marines?
Super fortunate that I started this early because so for me, you can go into the Marine Corps via enlisted or officer. Most enlisted people will go in directly out of high school. Officers, we will go in after college. Mm-hmm. So I applied for a Marine Corps scholarship. Thankfully, I got it. So I had a full ride to college. Otherwise, I wasn't going. We didn't have the money for it. Mm-hmm. And while I was in college, even though we had ROTC training pretty much 5-6 days a week, and most of our mornings started early, at least 5 a.m. in college, which is different. Athletes could probably identify with that, but I still had so much free time. Even beyond school, I was taking a plus load on school because I was forecasting that the later years I had in college, if I had a slightly lighter load, but I maintained being a full-time student, then I have even more time and hopefully more capital at that point to get real serious about this trading thing.
Yeah.
So while I was in college, it was actually relatively easy because for me, it was eye on the prize. And it's actually interesting now that I think back about it, because college is also when I started getting my foray into, I guess, less common ways of creating money. I started buying and selling motorcycles. That was a big one. Mm-hmm. And then I started buying broken cars with a friend. We would fix them and sell them. That was another way. So I started realizing that if I took some risk with this capital, but I was smart about what I was getting and how I was going about it, I could actually make pretty good money. Yeah. And that's how I made money throughout college, because I wouldn't pull any money out of my trading account. I would buy and sell motorcycles, buy and sell cars. And I started seeing that, the hustle is there. There's a lot of different ways you can get into money once you have at least a little bit. I mean, the cars I were buying that, $500, $1,000, but it was transformational for me to see that. So while I was in college, it was easy. On active duty, trading is much harder, but I've learned to get really efficient with my time. I'm a very process-driven human being. Like I like to be trim the fat, lean operating, because it's just efficient. I'm obsessed with efficiency. So I started doing a bunch of my homework and my analysis for how I was going to trade at night. The market doesn't have to be open while I'm doing that. And then I would put on trades while I was commuting into work in the morning or when I was on my way home, depending on what the day looked like. And that worked for most days. And then when I would go on deployments and stuff like that, I would just set up the account so that I had trades that matched my time frame. That's why I love trading so much, is you can pick time frames that work for you. And that's exactly what I did. So once you develop the skill set, it's actually very malleable. Most people think trading, got to sit in front of the computer all day. And for me, I'm thinking like I'm trading to not do that. I'm trading to have the time. So I was able to do that pretty successfully. You just give up opportunities is what it comes down to, but it is what it is.
Kind of going back to the mindset piece, there's a lot of people that have a million different excuses about why they can't do something. And here's you're creating the time, you're following your schedule, you're planning ahead, and you're able to be building wealth while you're also serving in the Marine Corps at the same time and going to college too, but into the Marine Corps, being able to do that. And so it's not, hey, once I get out, then I can do the thing that I want to do. Right. You're running down both lanes at the same time. And because you're smart with how you're spending your time, you're able to do both, which is awesome. So congratulations on being able to do that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's just another testament to the impatience, because there was another, time fuse item. I was literally just, talking with my mom this past weekend and doing a budget for her because, she's getting older. And again, she doesn't have like a big retirement set up. So for me, I'm thinking I need to be in a position to take care of her because who else is there? She's by herself.
Yep.
So I had a lot of really strong motivation beyond just, I didn't want to necessarily live paycheck to paycheck, but I also felt early on like there's other people relying on me. And thankfully, I really like that pressure. That's good pressure for me. And I think finding what motivates you you can create time out of thin air. Everybody complains that there's not enough time, and you could make that excuse. It would be nice if there's more, but there's not. And yeah, once you get the right motivation though, the time, you just sleep less.
We'll table the trading talk. We'll kind of get back to that at the end to talk about a little bit of the nuts and bolts, because I want people to hear what you're doing and how that works. So let's talk about the real estate side then. For you, because you're in the Marine Corps, you're able to have access to the VA loan, and you were able to use that very strategically to your advantage. So talk about that process.
Yeah, for sure. So as soon as I found out that I was getting stationed, I already did we go to a school called TBS, the basic school, and it's right before you go to your first duty station. And this is when you're figuring out if you're going to go to 29 Palms in the desert of Southern California, or if you get to go to Camp Pendleton in sunny San Diego. So I already did market research on all of these places to figure out what my move was going to be. And if I landed in San Diego, which I did, I got Camp Pendleton, my game plan was to buy a house, because I started looking at some really, really rudimentary indicators. I was looking at things like average time on the market, average sale price. I was looking at average median income, and most specifically the trend of the average median income, to see if I felt like there was even an opportunity there. And when I got stationed in Camp Pendleton, I stayed on base. There's a hotel on base. You stay there for like 10 days while you're getting your feet under you. And then I immediately bought a house. And the way I went about buying a house was I had the capital at that point because I was doing well with trading, but I didn't want to burn it because military people have the VA loan available to them. And recently they got rid of even the cap on the VA loan. It used to cap out at like 749,000 or something like that, but they got rid of the cap. So that's another conversation. But I thought that, okay, if I can buy something that I would like to live in, there's one benefit. The second benefit I derive from that, if I live in this for a certain amount of time and then I want to rent it, I will be able to rent it because it's somewhere that you can commute to base. There will always be demand near any sort of military installation. People got to live somewhere. And then I also thought there was a safety net there, because especially in California that has very tenant-friendly laws, one of my jobs in the Marine Corps was a company commander. And one of the most awful parts about that job is you have to deal with everyone's BS. If husband and wife are fighting and wife calls into the command, that's now my problem. These two people that are having a domestic dispute, I'm involved. And I'm thinking, what am I doing here? But anyways, I realized though that that's a huge safety net, because if you have tenants that are being awful, I would just call the command and I would say, hey, I'm renting out to these people because I tell you what, the Marine Corps will take care of it. So I thought this is just a good backstop helping me reduce additional risk. So buy the house, live in it for 5 years or so while I was stationed on Pendleton. And then when I was rotating over, I stayed there to the reserves. I stayed there. And when I decided to leave, the house had appreciated quite a bit, but I was like, I could rent it for a little bit. I still think that the housing market is stable. So we'll go with it. And like I was just telling you, last 2 weeks ago, I think we just closed on that house. I rented it out for 2 years to a dual military couple that were absolutely fantastic. They were great tenants. And the house appreciated enough in value that it made selling it way more worthwhile, because two reasons. The first one is I still was available for that tax benefit, which is from publication 523. There's like different exemptions that you can qualify for. And then the other thing was I started just via my trading, I look at the markets every single day. And I started seeing a lot of warning signs, in my opinion, for the housing market. And I was just like, maybe I'll take the chips off the table and then I'll just reinvest when the time is right. And I ended up selling that house. I had made $260,000 that it's tax-free, and I'll just put that in the trading account for now. And then when I find another opportunity, I'll just rotate back out.
And you can continue to use your VA loan, moving forward. So it's not something where it's a one-time deal. You can continue to utilize that.
Yeah, there's stipulations with it. Typically, if you're buying a house with the VA loan, it has to be a primary residence for a certain period of time. But I emphasize certain period of time because that's something you can navigate around depending on what you consider your permanent residence. It's just like, anything else. Once you understand the rules, you can find ways to operate within the rules, but in a way that's advantageous for your objectives. But the main thing is exactly as you said. When I first bought my house, I used a VA loan so I didn't have to come out cash. Great leverage.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I went to rent it, I just refied and it unlocked the VA loan. It wasn't utilized anymore. And I had a chance to use it and it's ready to be used on something else.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I'm smiling because thinking about the strategy that you have to think ahead like that. Number one, most people don't think ahead that far. And so, so you're very strategic in how you approach things, but yeah, to have the knowledge to think ahead, plan ahead like that and say, this is what I think I want to do down the road, doing the market analysis, thinking, okay, I can rent this out in the future. It's phenomenal. And so once again, congrats to you on how you're able to handle those situations. And so I think for folks, in the military, like these are options that are available to you.
Huge.
And so, like you said, find the way that you can make this work for you and utilize it to your advantage because it's a benefit for you for the work that you've done, the service that you've given. And so find a way to make that of benefit to you. And you can see the profit that comes from that to the tune of over $250,000 because you stayed within the guidelines and you had the future sight to plan ahead on that. And yeah, you deserve to reap that reward.
And I think the really cool thing about something like the VA loan that it provides, like I said, is like, it's really good leverage because if the way I viewed it is if I buy a house that I like to live in, then I'm going to buy a house anyways. So I might as well like to live there. And then when I was doing the market analysis, especially in Southern California, I was like, I don't see it getting cheaper because I wasn't that far inland and there's only so much space to put houses. So I think if you're really strategic about where you choose to purchase a home, you can make good money off of rental income. Like we made our mortgage, HOA fees, and then money on top with the rent. And it was good. But I still, if I wanted to make a good amount of money, you need appreciation of the asset. So finding places where the asset will appreciate is incredibly useful. Like if I got stationed in North Carolina, which is another big Marine Corps base, I would have thought differently because housing prices, they just haven't changed much there over the past 20 years. Some pockets, yes, but where I probably would have lived, no. So I think being very thoughtful about where you choose to use it, it offers you the opportunity to maximize the output. But even if you buy a house in North Carolina and then you rent it out using your VA loan, you refi, like that's still not a bad move. You just don't necessarily get the additional kicker of capital appreciation, which is what I hunt for. That's anytime I'm looking at a real estate investment, I'm balancing it against what I know I can do in trading. Because I've been trading for 15 years now. I have a known good. I know what I can do. So if it can't outperform that, there needs to be a really good reason why I would do it. So I think once you find those numbers for yourself, depending on what income streams you have, the VA loan and using it as good leverage is just incredibly useful.
It's the difference between running uphill into a headwind versus running downhill with a tailwind, right?
Yep.
You're putting the odds in your favor, and it's your knowledge of trading that's helped you to think that way.
Yeah, I think that's completely accurate.
So talk to me about some of the other real estate stuff that you've done.
Yeah, for sure. So I was fortunate enough to find a couple of partnerships. So as I started developing a little bit more capital, I was interested in commercial real estate. And then I was also interested in real estate in near other military installations, because those are really the main platforms I think through are where can I rent relatively risk-free? Because like most, I'm a millennial. And unfortunately, a lot of us are risk averse. And even though I've developed a healthier relationship with risk, I still consider myself too risk averse. And I actually don't like that about myself. But anyways, I think by looking around military installations or by colleges were really useful places to hunt for properties, because I remember when I was in college, I really didn't care what it looked like. Didn't really care. And thankfully I didn't, because it was disgusting. But there's a beauty to that, because if you're renting that out, you just accept the fact that at the end of that stay, you are going to keep the security deposit and gut the house, repaint, and put some new college kids in there.
Yep.
So I started looking for opportunities to get exposed to different markets, but I favored partnerships in those instances for two reasons. One, because I wasn't local. So I wasn't going to be able to manage it myself. And I'm not a huge fan of management companies, mostly just because of the experience that my mentor had that I referenced earlier. He hasn't had the best experience with them. So unfair, so likely, but I still am hesitant about them. So I preferred partnerships for that. Plus, most of the opportunities would not outperform what I could do in the markets. So the way that I was using it as a risk diversification tool.
Yep.
So I found commercial real estate was really effective. I also found the returns were not great. It was very stable, very steady, at least what I could find out here. So my experience with commercial real estate out here was pretty limited. I didn't like what it did too well. Again, if I'm 50 or something like that, and I just want a stable income, great choice. But for now, it was a little too slow for me. But I've been continuing to focus on places that offer capital appreciation. Places like DC is a really good area. And yeah, that's really been the main strategy. Looking around colleges, looking around military installations, and focusing on capital appreciation. And yeah, that's the long and short of it.
One of the things I was just going to mention, just to chime in for folks considering colleges, is number one, typically it's higher rents.
Yes.
Because college students, it's, if whether it's a rent by the room or you get a bunch of people in a house and you split a lease, so you can get 30 to 50% more in rent. And then, as you kind of alluded to, they may have some additional wear and tear on the property, but they also don't care about updates. So it's not like, if I'm looking to rent out, depending on where I'm renting it out, it's, do they have to have, does the bathroom have to have these finishes? Does the kitchen have to have these finishes? College kids don't care about that, right? They're not like, oh my gosh, I love this house, but this one had granite countertops, and so I think we're going to choose the one with the granite countertops. It's not like that. It's different. Now there's classes within that, but at the same time, in general, yeah, they don't care as much about that. So you can save on some capital expenditures. Your maintenance might be a little bit higher, but at the same time, yeah, you can just, if you ever look to get out of the college rental game, then you could sink some money into some capital expenses. But at the same time, you can just run with it for a while, keep the meter running and experience those higher rents, still see the appreciation, still see the some of the tax benefits as well. So there is a lot of upside there.
And you hit a super important point on the appreciation, because there's always demand. As long as it's a thriving institution, there's a demand for proximity close to that institution, because a lot of people, especially if it's a predominantly out of state attendees to that college, which is what I would look for, a lot of them don't have a car. So they need to be close to something that they can get them to the campus. And I found that proximity always produced a premium.
So the other thing I want to touch on before we get back to trading here is you are an angel investor. And so this kind of comes back to building time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. You are experiencing time freedom and able to pursue some things that are a passion project for you as well. Maybe not the best return time on money, but at the same time, you get to choose to do what you want to do with it because of the investments that you've made in other areas. So talk about the angel investing for a sec.
Yeah, angel investing for me is super fun. And part of it is because I've always lamented this about myself, but I never came up with the good idea. I always wanted to start a business, and I would spitball things. I was like, I'm just not really feeling that. So angel investing was a way for me to enjoy other people's great ideas with them and help them be successful. And the more I thought about that, the more I realized that's who I am as a human being. I'm an enabler. I really love helping people do their best work. And it's the same thing I did in the Marine Corps. It was always all about the Marines, setting the Marines up for success. And I love that job. So angel investing was a way for me to kind of scratch that itch. And as you rightly pointed out, it is definitely not the best return on my time. And part of that might be because I choose to allocate more of my time than I probably need to. And the other thing is just because I'm genuinely interested in the things that I choose to angel invest in. And I really provide two main services. The first one is capital. And the other thing I help smaller companies that are trying to get off the ground is just strategy, spitballing ideas, because I've been fortunate enough to do it for a little while now. And I've created at least a small Rolodex, not like the Mark Cuban Rolodex who could call his whoever person. But in the niches that I've participated in, I have developed a small network of people where if I'm talking with a prospective business owner and they're like, oh, well, I need to do some market research on my customers. Like, okay, I actually know people that can do that. So I found all of that to be really engaging. It's a super fun time. The return on capital can be pretty good. It is so important though, for anybody that's interested, especially if there's a hard money loaning component, make sure you have a rock solid agreement. It is super important to have some sort of collateral, depending on whether or not you know these people. And it's high risk because if the collateral disappears for whatever reason and the business doesn't succeed, that money's just gone. It's just gone. And it is what it is. You could try to sue them, but now you're just spending more money on lawyers, that kind of thing. And then the last thing that I really think about is when you're loaning money, usury laws are super important to respect. And that was actually something that my attorney saved me from, because I was in the process of working in agreement with somebody. They were starting an entertainment company in Abu Dhabi. And I asked them, I didn't even propose this. I asked them, hey, how much money do you need? And what rate do you want it at? Because I wasn't going for equity. I was simply just going for a fixed rate return on the capital. And they suggested, X percent. And when I looked at it, in the first state that I had made that contract with them in New York, it was fine. When I moved to California, where we did the second contract, it would have not been fine. So I actually could have shot myself in the foot if for whatever reason there was an issue, with the agreement. So just a small lesson learned the hard way for me, almost making a pretty significant mistake, because essentially anything that had to go to court at that point would have favored them. But luckily the attorney caught it. He's like, nope, this ain't it. And that's why I think having an attorney help with that is useful. And the last thing I would say about angel investing is you just get to learn about stuff. You get to learn about stuff that's interesting to you that you might not spend as much time, as an individual, but you get to learn from somebody who spent hundreds and hundreds of hours on it, which is really cool. So it's, like you said, passion project, super fun.
I think that stuff's going to come back to you though later in life. Like you think about the relationships you're making, the business opportunities you're funding. It might just take longer for that hockey stick to grow, but the Rolodex you're developing, the number of industries that you're in, that can grow. It can just take longer of a time. And the nice thing is you don't need that for the money today, but the more you invest in that, you hit one great company, you make some great connections along the way, that might open up your world in a much larger way. So that'll probably just take more time, but it's going to come back to you, I bet.
Yeah. And I do think that makes sense, because there have been a couple really great success stories. I will say, going back to my risk averse nature, as soon as there's a reasonable opportunity to cash out, unless I see something with truly tremendous potential, which I haven't seen one yet personally, but there's a handful of them that I've had opportunities to cash out, and I typically take it because some of them, at least two instances, we were on the brink of it all going away. And luckily they got picked up for funding from a larger entity, and we were essentially able to cash out because they didn't want to dilute too much. But yeah, it can be very interesting. And just as you said, I do think it's important for anybody that's interested in that space is you had better have a long runway and not be super connected to that capital, because there is a good chance it ain't going to be there.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, I want to make sure that we do talk about trading for a couple of minutes here. So let's just assume somebody doesn't know much about trading. What can you share in kind of, 3 to 5 minutes here in terms of how you're utilizing that to be successful?
Well, what I do would take way longer than that to dive into.
Well, and I'll just quick add too, like, go to your YouTube channel, because there's so much there. We'll get into how they get a hold of you later, but sure. What you're doing is at an amazingly high level. So yeah, just give us the kind of the Cliff Notes version of how this works.
Yeah, for me, I trade derivatives, which are essentially different style instruments, and they're really weird. And essentially, it's just all make believe money is what it comes down to. But it can compound very quickly. Now, the thing that I do think would be useful for the listeners, though, is if I think about how I would get started with investing or trading if I were to start all over again after doing it for a while now. I think one of the most important things people should consider is opening up a brokerage account. You can do it with any of the larger brokerages that you like. I am not a big fan of like the smaller gamified brokers, but essentially a broker is just a connection person and they give you access to the markets. And setting up a buy and hold portfolio takes a few minutes. You can get into an index ETF. Like if it were me, I would open up a brokerage account. I would put whatever money I could in it. And then I would start with something like SPY, which is the S&P 500 index ETF, and just let it run. And depending on how long your runway is, you can include some bond ETFs or ENs, exchange traded funds or notes, and they help reduce risk because it spreads risk across a bunch of different assets, but it's only one ticker or one security that you have to trade, which is really nice. And I think the main thing is just the sooner people can start that, the better. Like I was so fortunate to have somebody mention it to me so young, and that's the only reason why I was able to do what I was able to do by the time I was before I was 30. And the way that trading and real estate work for me now is I just rotate to where I see opportunity. I still keep most of my investing capital in trading, again, because it's a known good. I know what I'm capable of and I'm confident in that result. However, if there's really good looking opportunity in real estate, I will happily rotate money over to that, which is exactly what we were talking about earlier. I definitely perceive a lot of overhead right now for real estate. It looks rough. Who knows what's going to happen? But I'm essentially just giving it 6-12 months to bake out, and we'll see what happens with the real estate market. And if there is any sort of correction, especially out here in San Diego, I'll happily buy another rental property. But it gives me the flexibility to rotate risk around as compared to being focal in just one thing, and you are stuck at that one point. Having multiple mediums that you invest in is really useful, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I should mention, this isn't financial advice, and don't invest more than you're able to lose. So just the disclaimer note on that. When for you did it kind of turn the corner where you're like, okay, there's obviously a large learning curve, you got to figure it out. But once you figure it out, where did you see this as being like, you know what, I can make this my career, and I can do really well with that. How long did it take for you?
I think probably 5 years. And the reason why I say 5 years is after the first couple years, you get your feet under. I got my feet under me, but then the issue is you only get to experience what the market shows you. And I was very fortunate that before we went into a decade-long bull market, meaning it's just one condition that you're seeing, I had already experienced 2007, 2008, 2009.
Yep.
That was super helpful. So I think the turning point for me was after I went through that really rough bear market. I emerged on the outside relatively unscathed. And I said, okay, like if I could survive that, I'm probably okay. So I think exactly as you said, it is a steep learning curve up front. And it's because the financial industry in general just looks to add barriers. So you need somebody. You can't do it yourself because you don't know that you could be, long a product, but short the market at the same time with the same thing. And that is just to confuse people. It's so annoying, but it is what it is. Yeah. So I think once you get over that hurdle, it starts to make sense. And then the main thing is as you deploy your strategy, you get more data points. And once you build a comfortable data set, then you can kind of optimize and say, yeah, like I kind of know what I can do. And that's really where it becomes powerful.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, we could spend a lot more time chatting on this stuff deeper, but we got a chance to kind of touch on the different streams, and really show how you were able to strategically plan ahead, make some smart choices, and have a pretty cool cash flow set up with a few different streams of income coming in, to where, like we said, being a millionaire at the age of 30 and being able to select what do I want to do with my time. versus feeling like you have to make decisions because you have to make money. Now you get to choose what you want to do with it. And so congratulations on that, and excited to see what the future holds. So for folks that want to learn more about the investing side, want to learn more just kind of in general, how can they do that?
Yeah, you guys can find me on Twitter at ES Invests, or on my YouTube channel, also at ES Invest. I keep it real simple. And then the ES, for the people that are wondering, it's just my initials because I'm super original. So those are really the two main things I'm active on.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, and best of luck to you in the future.
Absolutely pleasure. Thank you for having me. I look forward to keeping in touch, and thank you for doing what you do, because I think it's awesome.